opportunity to speak about this global issue. Well, let's proceed with the definition of domestic violence. Domestic violence is defined as any violent, abusive, or threatening behavior occurring between relatives, partners, or former partners. This includes actions intended to harm, intimidate someone within the family setting, whether in marriage or cohabitation, forcing them to act against their will or cause fear. Okay, let's proceed with the global statistic on domestic violence. Why we speak about women? The majority of domestic violence victims are women, and women are significantly more likely than men to become victims of homicide or to experience severe sexual and/or physical abuse. What are the gender dynamics in domestic violence? The vulnerability of women. Women tend to be victims because of two key factors. The first key factor is social. Historically, the structures of society have established the notion of women's supposed inferiority. These stereotypes have been deeply adopted over centuries, often by women themselves. For instance, there is a stereotype belief that to keep a man, a woman must exhibit self-sacrifice and submission regardless of the man's behavior. A tragic example of this happened in the recent homicide of a mother of three in Agrinio, Greece. After the murder, the perpetrator's sister re-victimized the killed woman by stating, "Oh, my brother was not that kind of person. She was the person who changed my brother. She had found someone else and squandered his money." Such comments reflect the persistence of damaging stereotypes. And the second key factor for domestic violence against women is the psychological. This factor is tied to a woman's personal history and personality trait. Many women grow deprived of unconditional love and affection during their childhood, leading to diminished self-esteem. As adults, they may adopt submissive behaviors rooted in a need for recognition. For example, women rejected by their own mothers often feel invisible unless they are needed by others, trapped in circles of codependence and vulnerability. And now, let's proceed with the male perspective. Stereotypes affect men too. While women are trained in learned helplessness, men are trained in learned strength. However, this expectation often proves unrealistic. Men are also shaped by societal norms, creating a unique tension. Excessive closeness triggers fears of losing their individuality. Excessive distance triggers fears of abandonment. To feel secure, some men try to exert absolute control over the emotional and physical proximity of their partner. The men most affected by rapid societal changes often display narcissistic tendencies. Those who experienced humiliation in the hands of their fathers may become abusive in various forms as a way of proving control. The path to prevention lies in awareness. Prevention is crucial for women. Studies show that the most significant factor leading to domestic violence is the victim's prior victimization. Women need to understand how they have tolerated such a situation to recognize how they can escape it. And you can see the circle of abuse. Abuse follows a circular pattern that becomes progressively entrenched, evolving through 4 phases in a repetitive loop. Very often, the first episode of abuse often occurs during pregnancy or after childbirth, as the perpetrator uses the child as a rival for their partner's attention and care. Phase 1. Tension and irritability. This stage is marked by escalating tension, where the abuser blames the victim, typically their partner, for all the frustration in their life. Phase 2. Aggression. At this point, the abuser appears to lose control. In the early circles, the aggression begins with increasing psychological abuse. Over time, as the pattern deepens, the violence escalates to physical abuse, becoming more severe with each recurrence. Early detection of warning signs is essential so women can live before the abuse becomes more intense. As previously mentioned, the circles of violence repeat itself over time. Women should recognize early signs of abuse, because abuse often begins mildly, with a contemptuous glance, a humiliating remark in front of others, a threatening tone of voice, and these behaviors escalate into generalized disrespect, unpredictable actions, coercive control, public humiliation, isolation from family, friends, or work, economic control to complicate separation, pathological jealousy, intimidation and threats, emotional deprivation designed to cause insecurity. Phase 3. Remorse and manipulation. Here, the abuser expresses regret, often attributing their actions to external factors such as stress, alcohol, overwhelming work pressure, etc. They may also attempt to manipulate the victim by citing personal traumas, such as a difficult childhood or a painful divorce, to justify their behavior. The manipulation may escalate to extreme measures, such as threats of suicide. It's essential to recognize that such threats are not an admission of responsibility, but a swift of blame onto the victim. And we saw this threat of suicide in the case of Agrino recently. Phase 4. Reconciliation, or the honeymoon phase. In this phase, the abuser expresses affection and care. This performance comes not from love, but from a fear of abandonment. It is often said that the opposite of love is not hatred, but fear. This phase plays on the victim's hope for a change, keeping them in the circle. Many women withdraw complaints or charges in the courts during this phase, holding on to the belief that reconciliation is possible. From dominance to violence, a progressive procedure. And the circle of the violence begins again, and the pattern repeats itself, accelerating over time, with increasing intensity. with shorter periods of calmness, with an expanding threshold of tolerance on the part of the woman, with a gradual erosion of her self-esteem and critical thinking skills. Ultimately, the woman becomes absorbed into her partner's identity. In the end, the woman's sole focus becomes survival. On the other hand, the violent man's goal is absolute control. His intention is to obliterate her individuality, reducing her to an object entirely at his disposal. Acting early. Women should leave after the first sign of psychological abuse, but they should also be very careful. When they resist psychological abuse, it often transitions to physical violence. Women must live with no second thought at the first sign of physical violence at early circles of abuse. Notably, physical violence tends to escalate when women decide to leave. It can culminate in sexual violence aimed at making the woman pregnant, thereby increasing her vulnerability and dependence. Sexual violence comes not from desire, but from possessiveness. Most homicides occur during or shortly after separation. Murder does not signify love, but the murderer's inability to cope with the overwhelming realization of the other person's autonomy. Και θα ήθελα να το πω αυτό και στα ελληνικά για να γνωρίζετε ότι λένε πάρα πολλοί ανθρωποκτόνοι ότι την αγαπούσα πάρα πολύ και τη σκότωσα. Αυτό δεν ισχύει. Είναι η απόδειξη του ότι δεν μπορούσε να αντέξει, του φαινόταν αβάσταχτη η εταιρότητα του άλλου ανθρώπου. Let's proceed with the prolonged methods of coercion or brainwashing. Prolonged exposure to coercive persuasion methods can alter brain function, making individuals highly susceptible to suggestion. A victim's thoughts become detached from their personality, operating independently, as we can see from the picture. To endure the violence and avoid losing their sanity, the victim adopts an external observer's perspective of their own suffering. Δηλαδή αυτό στα ελληνικά σημαίνει ότι το θύμα αποστασιοποιείται από τη σκέψη του και γίνεται εξωτερικός παρατηρητής των όσων βιώνει ως ένας μηχανισμός άμυνας για να μην τρελαθεί. These techniques are commonly used in cults, στις σέκτες, and include behavioral techniques, isolation from family, workplace and social environment, financial dependency and control of information, for example, monitoring phone calls. Emotional techniques, verbal manipulation, blackmail, threats of retaliation, and alternating between leniency and harshness. Cognitive techniques, refusal to communicate, vague messages to disorientate the victim, fostering self-blame, lying, sarcasm, and disdain. And finally, unpredictable attacks. And in this field, I would like to give you the experiment of unpredictable attacks. The Seligman's learned helplessness experiment. How, in this experiment, we can understand how the victim's brain can be neutral in front of abuse, in front of violence. During the learning phase, dogs were placed in a chamber where they received random electric shocks at irregular intervals. They had no means to escape or control the shocks regardless of their actions. During the testing phase, the dogs were moved to a new chamber with two parts. One part delivered electric shocks and the other was shock-free. A low barrier separated the parts, allowing the dogs to jump to safety. And what are our observations? Dogs without prior exposure quickly learned to jump over the barrier to escape the shocks. But dogs from the learning phase remained passive, even when escape was possible. Having learned in the first phase that escape was futile, they no longer tried. And the conclusion is that exposure to uncontrollable and unavoidable negative conditions can lead to helplessness. Dogs learned during the first phase that attempts to alter their situation were futile, and this belief shaped their behavior in the second phase. And what is the establishment of learned helplessness in human beings? Victims of abuse become conditioned to external control, trapped in a circle of unpredictable attacks. They lose the capacity to envision change and feel incapable of taking action. This gradual breakdown provides clear answers to questions often raised in the aftermath of violent crimes against women. But why did she leave? Because she had been trained to helplessness. But she was educated. How did this happen to her? Because brain disconnection is rooted in neurological structure, not education. And now, allow me please to provide you with an example of triumph and escape from abuse. Today, we have with us a mother of child, who is my client also. With us also via Zoom are her parents and my mother too. She comes from a Western country, but she is against her will currently residing in Greece for the sake of her child, who holds dual citizenship, hers and that of the Greek father. Although she has given me her consent to share her history in full, professional ethics prevent me from doing so to protect her privacy and the privacy of all parties involved. What I can do, however, is read from the court's interim measures decision, which is a matter of public record and suitable for academic discussion. The court has granted her temporary sole custody of her young son and ordered child support payments as well as spousal alimony. And what the card says, I will read the decision, not all the decision, and then I will ask you if you can understand some actions of abuse according to the decision. The mother felt trapped in Greece, especially given her isolation from her parental family who reside in her home country. This feeling intensified when her husband announced that he would relocate to the X country in early 2022. It is evident that the marital breakdown was solely attributable to the husband's actions. Conversely, no responsibility for the marital dissolution can be attributed to the applicant, the woman. From the outset of their marriage, she contributed financially and later dedicated herself to raising her child, diligently managing the household and refraining from interfering in her husband's finances. The husband, however, remained deeply attached to his own parental family, continuing to provide them with a significant portion of his income during the marriage. The wife's concerns about their financial situation were justified, as this issue had been of critical importance to both of them at the start of their marriage. However, as time passed, the wife was not kept adequately informed by her husband. The husband has offered his opponent and their child a residence to ensure they have a roof over their heads, thereby reducing their living costs. However, it is evident that their continued residence in this property is not in the best interest of the child. The contentious relationship between the mother and the husband's family, who live in the same building, associated with language barriers that impede communication, is likely to create tensions that could harm the child's emotional well-being. Okay, can you find some actions of abuse described in this decision?
Anything that is done against your will, it's already violence. If she's living here against your will, it's already violent.
Yes, at the beginning, the decision says that she's trapped in Greece. Isolation from her parental family. So we see the isolation, one method of abuse. And after that, we see the financial abuse is described in the decision. And of course, in general, what is against her will. Okay, what are the factors behind her triumph? This abusive husband ultimately failed to fully control his wife because he had a strong support network he underestimated. Her parents, they are now with us, and the Greek cards, which have so far ruled in her favor in 4 interim measures. And starting today, if she wishes, the community of the Greek Toastmasters, which I call family. And finally, something to take away with you, some closing remarks. The seeming submission of women to their partners is not merely a symptom of abuse, but also a survival and adaptation strategy. Psychological violence is more devastating than physical violence because it leaves no tangible evidence. The abuser's denial and the victim's environment questioning their reality often lead to what we call mental destabilization. Στα ελληνικά είναι φρενοβλαβοποίηση. Abuse does not result from the victim's shortcomings. Rather, it's the victim's strengths that the abuser covets and seeks to appropriate. When I say appropriate, I mean it literally. The abuser's goal is to absorb the victim, to annihilate their individuality and to merge into one entity. And finally, there was never love. Love was never a factor in these relationships. This is not a case of love turning into hatred. Instead, it is envy transforming into hatred. Thank you very much.